Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. If you're paying attention, you know that you only make money when you work. It might be great money, but it's dependent on you. The information on this podcast will help you solve that. We interview experts and provide analysis into financial freedom through commercial real estate. Why? To help physicians like you thrive. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Surgeon Syndicate. This is your host, Dr. Michael McManus. And today we're going to be talking about the light industrial retail sector. This is an area that I have a particular interest in because these are smaller buildings and easier for smaller investors to get into. They're also very versatile buildings that allow for a lot of different uses, which is good when it comes to leasing them up. So let's jump right in here. So the light industrial sector has emerged really the last, since COVID, especially as a pivotal component of the broader market, driven by significant trends in consumer behavior and technology. Unlike heavy industrial markets, which are typically larger buildings used for manufacturing or large warehouse spaces, these light industrial properties are smaller and more versatile, and it can absorb or it can be used for a lot of different things, like small warehousing, distribution, and even some light manufacturing. And a lot of it is for final leg distribution. And this become a key part of e-commerce. So historically, the light industrial sector has often been overlooked in favor of larger logistical hubs and distribution centers. And when we look at some of the bigger players in the market, they like these bigger ones. Part of it is the amount of money they need to deploy and what they're trying to accomplish. So for smaller investors, some of these smaller buildings can actually be a nice sweet spot in the market where you're not competing with some of the larger investors. Now, these have become key points that are in higher demand as we are looking at things like last mile logistics facilities and in-house light industrial, especially as some manufacturing has been re-onshored, and for smaller, lighter manufacturing. So these are places that have been taking up the need for small warehousing, last mile distribution, and smaller manufacturing. And they fall in underneath some of the bigger warehouse spaces or bigger facilities out there that are being used for production. So, what are the dynamics that have been driving all this? Key ones have been the influence again of e-commerce, supply chain logistics, and regional demographic changes. So, e-commerce and last mile logistics. So again, the explosive growth of e-commerce that has been driving a lot of things going on as there's more competition in this. And we all see this with like our Prime accounts where you're like, I want to get it the next day. I mean, think back to 10 years ago when you ordered things online, to get it in 2 days was really good. And now we're talking a lot of the competition here is to deliver it the next day or even the same day. And that's what consumers are looking for now. And is what this requires is a lot of distribution facilities that are closer to where the people are and can bring things out quickly. And therefore, they may be smaller facilities rather than some of the really large warehouses. So as we look at this supply chain reconfiguration, and as companies are looking to de-risk their supply chains. So a lot of things before, where you'd have a lot of companies distributing things out of the same big warehouses and using second or third hand contractors to do it. After companies saw their businesses completely disrupted when there were supply chain issues, a lot of them wanted to bring that closer to home. Often the nearshoring or reshoring, onshoring has brought a lot of manufacturing back to the US, but also has brought where companies have wanted to bring tighter control back into their supply chain. And that often means if they're not giant companies, having smaller facilities to ship out of. Um, we see this even more as companies are building up for these demographic trends, as we've seen a lot of people moving to the South, both the Southeast and the Southwest, with these population influxes and a lot of businesses moving there, has created especially a lot of demand in those areas. But this demand has gone on everywhere, and we've seen it in the Midwest. We see it in the West. So this demand for small industrial is not just a Southeast thing, where we've seen more with the multifamily, where everybody was rushing into that market. So, what's the appeal of these buildings as an investor? What's the investment appeal? They typically generate higher yields compared to a lot of other asset classes. Why is that? Because these are typically simple buildings. They're a shell, they're a warehouse. And so they don't require a lot of work to them. One of the other investment appeals is if you're doing small one or two tenant facilities, is often these can be done especially if it's a single tenant facility, as a complete triple net lease where the owner has zero responsibility for the building. What that means is your cost of running one of these investments is very low because there's really not any administrative costs. Mostly what you're doing is you're watching your tenants and making sure they're paying for things that ultimately the landlord could be held responsible for, which is going to be taxes, insurance, and utilities like water, um, and trash pickup and things like that, that the city may come back and look to the owner for if they're not being paid. So you're kind of overseeing your tenants and making sure these are getting paid. And because of the simplicity, they can be very profitable things. The other side that's really cool is a lot of these buildings aren't pretty, and they can be some of the ones with the best risk reward profile. As people are looking for investments and they like that nice looking retail center, they like that nice apartment complex, and they like things that they're more familiar with because everybody shops and everybody has to live somewhere. Most people aren't as familiar with the supply chain logistics and shipping and light industrial facilities. And so they don't know what these buildings look like, and they may look at it and not be so interested in it. So often these generate really nice returns. Supply constraints are another big one, especially when we get to these last mile logistics, because companies are looking for places they can ship out of or manufacturing that are very close to the population they're serving. Now, as you get an area that's built out in a bigger city, there aren't large spaces to build warehouses. And a lot of the time you get cities, especially when they're more residential areas, they don't want buildings like this. So there can be severe supply constraints. And so if you own one of these buildings, your ability to lease it up, you can have a lot of leverage because there aren't a lot of other options. Um, Now, the economic sensitivity and why these tend to fare well, when you look at the bigger warehouses, and you can see these kind of like warehouse parks that are built along the interstate on the edge of town or between cities where there's a lot of open space. And they'll build these 100,000, 200,000 square foot warehouses. You put a whole group of them together and get a bunch of people moving in there. And it kind of becomes a shipping destination. But all of that still has to ship somewhere. And if you see a big downturn, these bigger, newer places that have created a lot of supply can be some of the ones that turn back quicker. But when you're looking at places that the supply is truly constrained, like these smaller ones more in the city, it can be more these will stay in demand longer when you see a downturn in the market. So they have a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're less vulnerable to downturns and can make their way through these downturns better. Um, when we look at the other things that technology and some of the upgrading that's going on with distribution and with warehouse, because we're looking at a simple box here, when you want to bring in new technology, whether it's faster internet, robotics, different things that are sorting racks. These are easy things to bring into a building versus when you're talking about upgrading your technology in an office building or in a retail setting. So it makes it really much more simpler to upgrade them. Now, the flexibility is really the big thing here. When you get into these light industrial spaces, and these can be things that can vary in size from a couple thousand square feet to 20,000 square foot building, and they be demised into smaller uh, 5,000, 10,000 square foot spaces, which the flexibility here is part of what's great about leasing them up. They can be demised down into what are contractor garages that, depending on the size of the contractor, maybe a couple thousand square feet, maybe 10,000 square feet. It can be a small warehouse that, again, could be 2,000, 5,000 square feet. So it's being used for shipping. Light manufacturing. I've seen small manufacturing facilities in spaces as small as less than 2,000 square feet, even. So when you get a building like this, and the cost of demising it is much less. So if you need to come back and move walls and make it different spaces to bring in your really quality tenants, the flexibility is another great part that makes it economically, and I'm still missing the word here. They're really they do well even when we see economic downturns. So these are some of kind of the really big advantages here. Now, where are we seeing new light industrial? The two places you'll typically see it is where you got a lot of buildings. So it will either be as suburban stuff is being built, and as you know, the people who are looking at this market will look at where new housing developments are being built, and some of this takes it's a real developer thing to go to the city and say, hey, within all this new housing we're building, we're going to need the things to support these people. And not all cities get this, especially when you get, you can get suburbs where the people running these newer suburbs may not have a lot of experience and need to be shown the value of both retail projects that will serve the residents of these new communities, and industrial projects that can also be places for people to work and to serve their shipping needs. And a lot of communities, when they're new, will just want all houses. Like, no, we're just housing. And so the developers who can convince them of the benefits of having everything a community needs kind of put together in one place can really be great investments when they can get these put in. Because again, once you get that space and all the homes are built around it, it's hard to build more. So you've got a competitive advantage there, and tenants need your building. The other place is with urban infill. So when you get a city that had the the suburban flight and the downtowns that kind of got gutted out, these are places where they're now coming back in. Is actually typically easier working with the city to be able to build some of these projects, or there's already warehouse there and they need to be retrofitted. So this is a great place that when you get redevelopment of an urban center and you have a lot of these buildings, and these buildings may have been almost abandoned buildings and can have new life brought back into them. So kind of as a recap of our first part here, small industrial, really the big things that drive it is when you get the right building in the right place, there can be very little competition. And because it's such a versatile, smaller building, there's a lot of different uses, which can make it really good for leasing. So when we look at these types of buildings, my next question is, where's a good place to be investing in these? And there's a lot of different opinions about what part of the country we want to be investing in. So what areas, this is like a lot of other things. The Sun Belt expansion with all the people moving, places like Texas, Arizona, Florida, and the Carolinas have made it a real hotspot. I've got some money in a great little light industrial project that's in Florida, and the thing about the East Coast of Florida is it's kind of back, you're stuck between the ocean and the Everglades. And so properties in that area, once they're developed, there's only so much land there. And it has a lot of both the population growth driving into the area and very limited space. Um, Southern California is another, as I did a lot of reading that remains a hot spot for industrial real estate. For one, I don't like investing in California because I don't like the number of laws. There are people out there that invest strictly in Southern California. It's really one of those places I think you need to be an expert in. But the thing about Southern California is California in and of itself is one of the largest economies in the world. I believe I saw recently it's as big as France. So it's a big economy. There's a lot going on there. There's a lot of ports there, major ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach. So there's a lot of materials that come through California. The area is very built out. It's very difficult to build new supply. So again, there are places, if you can find the buildings, they can be great cash cows and can be a great place to invest. The Midwest keeps coming up. What's happening in the Midwest, and we talked a little bit about onshoring, is as manufacturing has been coming back to the US, where's manufacturing always been? It's always been in the Midwest. And the Midwest is one of the cheapest markets in the country as far as real estate, as far as labor. And so there's a lot happening in the Midwest right now from an industrial standpoint. And the interesting thing here is where you get a bigger manufacturer in one of these Midwestern cities, all around those big places, you'll see a lot of small, light industrial. When I first got into this, I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and one of the biggest manufacturers in Green Bay makes cardboard boxes and other paper products. And they have these giant places, these giant plants, factories, and it's almost like the center of a city. Or when you look at the pictures of Europe from the Middle Ages, and you got the castle and then the little town around it. The big factory is like the castle, and then around it is this entire other industrial community where you got smaller shops for people who provide services to the bigger factory, whether they're maintaining the equipment, they're selling the equipment, they're trucking companies, they're providing consulting. And so all of this kind of pops up around it. And that's where you get a lot of this light industrial types of properties. And then, of course, one of my favorite places, we're looking, when we get into the middle of the country, you have these shipping areas. And here in Salt Lake City, they've got now this program where they're looking, I think they call it an inland port. And the idea is that it's an area that's really in the middle of the country. And in a day drive, you can reach a very large portion. So there's a lot of shipping activity going on here. That's kind of driving the industrial market in this area. So we've talked about why light industrial. We've talked a little bit about where. So what are some of the markers that you would look at to compare purchase price to rent and things like that? So of course we have the cap rate. This one we talk about a lot. It's one of those basic metrics, which is basically the net operating income divided by the purchase price. Typically, higher cap rates indicate a higher return, but usually you'll see those if it's considered high risk. And those are if you know a market well, you can understand that market. If it's an underappreciated market, you can see higher cap rates, which mean better profits. But it can still be lower risk if you really understand that market. But that's part of understanding the market. Another metric you can look at is called the gross rent multiplier, or GRM. This is basically the purchase price divided by the gross annual rent. Now, this really comes back to what kind of leases you have. If you have gross leases, or triple net leases. If you have triple net leases, this kind of almost is just like the cap rate, but basically a lower GRM suggests a better return on investment, as it indicates the property generates more income relative to the purchase price. And again, so this could be either a first step if it's a gross rent because it doesn't incorporate your operating expenses. If you're looking at a truly triple net building, this will kind of show you will kind of be like an inverse of the cap rate. Price per square foot is one really of just knowing the market you're in, where industrial space is selling at, to give you a basic idea of whether the price you're looking at is a good price, is not. Um, and then the bigger thing when you're really looking at this risk return is the location, and the light industrial, again, location is it an easy place for people to get in and out of? It is a place for shippers where they're around a lot of neighborhoods, so it can be last leg logistics or some other reason that you see that really gives this a reason to be a good place to operate out of. So, what are the challenges and risks of investing here? With the light industrial sector offers some great opportunities. There's still challenges and risks that need to be navigated. And this one, when you're looking to invest, especially if you're investing with somebody else, they should be giving you a discussion of what they see as the risks or challenges and how they're going to meet those challenges and what are the chances of them happening. And if they do happen, how big of an impact will that be? Big one, affordability and rent growth. And this probably across all markets is a big one right now because when interest rates were low, owners saw buildings as, the prices were just shooting up and shooting up. So they got numbers in their head that it was what their property was worth. But now that interest rates have changed, a lot of these buildings aren't affordable if the sellers still have these big numbers in mind. And the numbers don't just work. So it's not like you just run out and start buying metal buildings and that they're going to do great. Really, they need to be at the right price. The other one is factoring in rent growth. A few years ago, we saw rent growth was just skyrocketing up along with the value of buildings. Rent growth hasn't been the same either. And this varies a lot from market to market. And a lot of it is a supply and demand thing. So if somebody's promoting that they're going to see huge rent growth, make sure they have a good story around why that rent is still going up. Because in a lot of the country, we're not seeing the rent growth we used to. What is the economy going to do? Economic uncertainty. If we see a big downturn, what's going to happen to the need for this building? And that's looking at the area it's in and what kind of competition does it have. And so if you're buying a building that really doesn't have a whole lot of competition and there's still going to be a community that needs served, even in an economic downturn, or if the tenants of the building are going to be somebody who is unlikely to suffer in an economic downturn, that's some of the things you need to look at for economic certainty because I don't know what's going to happen, but there's a lot of indicators out there that we may still see some economic challenges ahead. At the same time, seem to have overcome a lot of them. So we don't know when and how that's going to happen. What are the risks if we see disruption of supply chain and logistics again? This is possible, but I think with all the disruption that happened with the pandemic and the challenges that were overcome, and as things are kind of resetting now, the supply chains are a lot more robust and have been built now around disruptions. And so at least when you're looking at that, go, okay, if we had something that disrupted, is this location, is this building, is this tenant somebody who's going to be affected heavily by it? Because those are the questions about how much it's going to hit. It's not just that there were supply chain things somewhere in the economy, but are they going to affect this specific building? And then going into it, how is this whole thing being invested. We've talked a lot about this, and interestingly, I just recently got my first capital call on some of my old multifamily syndications. It was a small capital call, so it wasn't a big deal. I'd felt pretty fortunate that hadn't happened before, but it happens. Um, but the reason about talking about capital calls is how's it being financed? And we're getting back to where people are starting to do some more creative financing again, where they're starting to use bridge loans and private debt. And what is the timeline? I've always been somebody that I don't like short-term debt, and anything under 10 years to me is short-term debt. Under 5 years is really short-term debt. And the reason for that is, if so much can happen in 10 years, that if you plan for your building is to turn this building and turn this investment in a 5-year timeline, but in 5 years, things aren't going well, but your financing still works and you can hold on to it and ride through it, uh, you're going to tend to do a lot better. But if you've got short-term financing, things turn against you in the short term and you don't have the ability to ride it out. And that's what this capital call I got is part of the financing expired, and it was at 5 years, and they were writing it out okay, but they had to refinance a portion of it, and it was coming at much worse terms. So they had to do a capital call to be able to basically pay a fee to change the terms of the loan. Um, so there's where in the capital availability is looking at the time frame, and if it's a shorter time frame debt, make sure the project's a shorter time frame and that you agree with the assessment of the sponsor that this whole thing can be done in the time frame they're talking about. Other risks can be environmental and regulatory considerations, especially if you're looking at a building that's a value add and its use is being changed. Understanding the city it's in, the state it's in, and what that change is going to be, and what they're going to require. If this used to be a manufacturing facility and it's going to be changed to logistics, what was manufactured there? Are there going to be environmental problems with it? Are they doing environmental studies? Um, and also from the city or the state that it's in, is it a business friendly environment? Is this serving a need that the city is going to want to approve it because it's going to make it better? Or are they bucking up against the city and trying to do something the city doesn't really want? I'm a big fan of doing projects that the city likes and they support you in it rather than fighting for it and trying to fight your way through it. And the last risk is competition. And again, that's part of what we like about these is if you can find a building that's locked in a situation where it's very unlikely somebody can build a competing building, that's a great situation to be in. It's a great part of both this light industrial market and of small retail. If you can be in the middle of a community where the rest of it's residential and the community likes its residential and really screams when you try and do something besides residential, it's going to be hard for somebody to build new things to compete with you. And that's a good space to be in. So when we look at these spaces, when we look to the future, because anytime we're investing, we're really doing a little future prediction. One, I like projects that when we look at the future, let's look at the present first. They cash flow right away, but will they keep cash flowing? What are the trends going on out there, and are they in our favor or not? A big one for all these last leg stuff is, will there be sustained demand for e-commerce and retail? This has been discussed a lot by a lot of people. E-commerce is here to stay. People are just expecting better service, which is going to require more robust distribution networks. Retail is here to stay. People are still shopping. What's interesting when you look at some of these light industrial spaces is some of them now will have both warehouse and retail in the same building, because the retail folks are like, yeah, I want a store in this location. And the two sometimes can go together very well. And you may see some things that seem like odd bedfellows. They're working well together, but whatever the plan is for this building, are the trends in the favor of that location? Biggest one here with all real estate is, where are people moving? If you want to be buying stuff where people are moving to, because now that means the wind is at your back and it's moving the whole thing forward. If you're buying in a shrinking community, can be a bad thing, and that needs to be that you really know that community. You got a really great price and have some key reasons why this is a good deal if you're going to choose to buck the population trend. What's going on with technology and automation? Sometimes automation will make things more efficient and they can use a smaller space, which may drive demand if you have smaller spaces. At the same time, it may mean they need less space and that they can get rid of some of their spaces. So a lot of this is knowing what kind of things are going on with technology and automation. And are these things good or bad for your facility? And this doesn't mean you have to be an expert in all these automation, but if you're investing in this area, it's something you want to keep your finger on. I get all these newsletters from technology things and industrial things. So I just breeze through them and I read them quickly, kind of seeing, are they talking about something new I've never heard of? Is there some big trend starting? And that way you just have an idea of what's going on. At the same time, if you're owning these buildings yourself, is talking to your tenants and what's going on with the tenants. What kind of new things are they seeing and talking about? And can you support them in adopting to make them stronger? Or are there things that look like maybe you're going to be losing tenants? And if you're investing passively, that that the people who are running the things you're investing in are doing these things, and they talk about these relationships so that you can know they're out there doing their due diligence and they're not just set it and let it go. Because if your tenants go out of business, regardless of their lease, it can be hard to reclaim that money. So that's an important thing to know, that either you as the landlord or the landlord you're investing with understands these changes in what's going on with technology in this space and how it might affect you. So here's a lot of different things going on here. All right. So wrapping this up, our discussion today, light industrial real estate. We're in this space where a lot of things are going on, and there's been a lot of increased demand in this sector. When you get down to, on a bigger scale, there's a lot of big players playing here. And it's not like you can just walk up and buy one of these things and that there's no demand and it's easy. But in understanding your local community, there's a lot of great investment opportunities here for people who are investing passively. When you see light industrial, I think these are always worth looking at, because many, many areas across the country, the demand for this stuff is super hot. The number of tenants you have lined up looking for something to move into is really big, especially when you get somewhere where the ability to build new stuff is highly constrained, or if where the tenants want to be is in an area where again, it's tough to build new stuff. So again, this is light industrial market. This is stuff that can be used for lots of different uses. It can be used as small warehouse, for last leg logistics, for small manufacturing. Also, it can be demised into smaller spaces for things like contractor garages. So a lot going on here, and a great place to be looking to invest in. If you have any questions about this, or you'd like to discuss it more, feel free to reach out to us here at surgeonsyndicate.com. You can book a call, say hello. And as always, we appreciate you being here and look forward to seeing you again here on Surgeon Syndicate. This has been an episode of Surgeon Syndicate. If you got value from this episode, you know other surgeons are hungry to become job optional, and you can help them by sharing this content today. Schedule a call and we can make a plan. Looking forward to having you with me on the next episode.